Good afternoon. Welcome to Across the Pond, episode 2.
Pond, across the pond with Barry and Chad.
Cool. So it's episode 2. Welcome back to Across the Pond, our weekly podcast. We're back. Barry, what do you say to that?
It's super exciting to be back. I think a lot of podcasts don't get past the first episode. So to make it to episode 2 is a huge achievement. So very chuffed.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, I mean, I just want to say thanks as well to anyone who sent feedback through. I say kind of from both of our sides, we got quite a bit of feedback last week and it's been overwhelmingly positive. So yeah, I mean, just from me, a massive thank you to that. And anyone who's given kind of recommendations on how we could improve, that is definitely something we're looking for as well. We're newbies to this, so we kind of want to get better at it every episode.
Definitely. I want to echo that from my side. The number of voice messages and the number of voice notes and all that I got given were incredible. And even though a lot of you are biased, we really appreciate it nonetheless.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, let's delve into this second episode. We've got jingles this time.
The week that was.
All right, so for the week that was, I'm actually going to hand this one over to Barry to deal with the first thing. I mean, it's been a busy week, but what was the one thing that you picked out to chat about?
Yeah, so the story that has been fascinating me has been this whole story around WeWork as the company. And it's kind of a crazy story. I can see the novel on the way, I can see the movie on the way, I can see all of the stuff on the way about how crazy a story it is. Yeah. So let me try and give some context, then we can discuss it, Chad. So WeWork is a giant company based out of New York. And what they do is they do co-working, right? So they offer space as a service, as they like to call it. And you can go and rent 1 desk or 2 desks or 80 desks, and you can flex up and down on a monthly basis. And basically, they take away the pain of having to have your own office space, your own lease, your own building, etc., and let you rent from them on a monthly basis, right? So it's a fascinating company. A company that's done very, very well, supposedly very, very well, grown incredibly fast over the last few years, and has become a giant behemoth all around the world. In fact, they just opened their first 2 locations in South Africa this year. Right. So they are growing as fast as they can, and they've got a few hundred locations. They've got thousands and thousands of people working in their space. And were seen as a very, very strong company, a typical Silicon Valley Uber-type company where they try and scale and grow as fast as possible. Right. We came to sort of mid-2019, and they decided, cool, we need to take some money off the table, and they started looking at an IPO in the States. Yep. And like Chad, you'll know, once you start looking for an IPO, you have to start releasing information that was previously private and previously just for the investors themselves. And all of a sudden, when they started releasing financial information, they started releasing information to the public to start preparing for this IPO. All of a sudden, a lot of the skeletons in the closet came out, and it was clear that the business was not as strong as we once thought, right? It was that typical Silicon Valley model where they were losing hundreds of millions of dollars every single quarter.
Insane.
Trying to scale as fast as they could. And had huge demand, had lots of people in their offices, but were losing money on every single location. So the per unit economics just weren't working. And so there was a lot of drama. On top of that, their CEO, well, their ex-CEO now, was a bit of a lunatic. And he was one of those guys who was just selling the story to investors and selling this vision of being this global company. But on the other side, he was doing shady things like moving leases from his own personal name into WeWork.
Oh, right.
Or things like he had bought the trademark for the We company, and then he had sold it to his own company for like $6 million or something silly. Right. So like shady things like that. And so the board kind of came together and they said, cool, this guy is a harm to the company because number one, he's nuts. If you listen to any of his press conferences, he's like he kind of feels like a hippie in a way.
Right.
And he talks about consciousness a lot, and he doesn't really feel like your CEO that you want to put trust in for a large multinational company. Yeah. So the board kind of said, cool, we're going to kick this guy out and we're going to put someone else in place. But the problem is that their whole valuation dropped by up to 70%, right? So they were at something crazy like $80 billion, and it's come way down because the per unit economics of these buildings doesn't really make sense. As a result, SoftBank, which is a huge Japanese investment arm from the Japanese bank itself, they put in billions and billions of dollars in the beginning rounds, and so they are the major shareholder, and they've got the most to lose if WeWork goes belly up.
Yep.
And so what they had to do was they had to come in, I think they injected something like $7 or $8 billion US into the company to try and keep it alive, to try and make sure that things happen and this IPO actually happens eventually. So I just thought it was interesting discussion talking about how like I for long thought there's been too much money in Silicon Valley and a lot of silly ideas are getting funded crazily, and people don't seem to care about profit. All they care about is growth. And this is an example of when that potentially could go wrong. And a giant company is not making any profits, is losing money at a scary rate. And investors keep throwing money at them. So Chad, I don't know what you think about that as an economic business model.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, in terms of its business model, as you say, I mean, it seems like a fairly simple thing. They essentially lease out big buildings and sublet them to corporates and individuals. So, make them accessible to people who, I'd say quite big in the sort of startup space and, businesses that are still building in terms of getting that flexible office space. But 100%, when I first saw this story, I was quite shocked as you said, they were kind of gearing up to list. Everything was going well, and all of a sudden, now that those skeletons are coming out of the closet, what went wrong? And I think the most concerning here is that 4,500 employees are currently at risk of losing their jobs.
Yeah, it's really a crazy story. It's hard to believe that it's real. It feels like a novel. It feels like Theranos all over again with Elizabeth Holmes and the chaos that happened behind the scenes at that company. And what was really interesting for me was that when I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, I had a lot of discussions with people in New York because this is seen as one of New York's biggest success stories. Like when you think tech startups, everything happens in Silicon Valley, and New York is trying to challenge Silicon Valley as an ecosystem. And this was one of New York's like pride jewels. And so when I was chatting to a lot of people in New York, they were expressing their disappointments and kind of their angst about it. Because as you say, this company should exist, right? The idea is solid, right?
Yep,
and
100%.
it needs to exist, and it will exist. And WeWork in the best possible position to make it happen because of their brand strength, because of their investment, and because of their scale around the world. And so I kind of think that this is going to blow over, and they're going to figure out a way to make it profitable and make it work, because in my mind I don't understand how it couldn't work. But at the same time, it's crazy that one CEO's decisions or one person's decisions could put this giant thing at risk, which has huge implications across the whole of the world.
Yep, 100%. And in terms of SoftBank, I saw they're kind of now knocking on the door of Mizuho, which is another big Japanese bank, as you say, asking for more funds. And the question is here, as you say, if they inject enough capital in, now that they've stripped out the rotten apple, is there actually a solid business model there and good quality tenants currently in these buildings? I definitely know in London we've got loads. You say there's 2 in South Africa. I haven't actually counted the number of WeWork buildings that I've seen so far. So definitely on the side of the planet, and of course, as you say, the US and sort of the rest of the world, a really big company that's grown really quickly, and I think it's a very big concern if this is close to the end for them.
No, without a doubt. And actually, when I was in New York, we met with WeWork itself, and they claimed, I'm not sure how true this is, but they claimed that they are the second biggest property owner in New York.
Wow.
And that sounds crazy, but at the same time, they've got hundreds of locations there, and maybe it's true. They wouldn't have said it if they couldn't fact check it. So, it's a huge organization. When I was thinking about it, when we were I was at the WeWork here in Johannesburg a couple of days ago, and we had a chance to meet with the GM of WeWork South Africa. And he was talking about how the Rosebank building they've just built here, they opened it to the market, and they were looking for, I think, to fill 2,000 desks, and they were sold out in a matter of weeks. Right, so the demand is crazy, and so surely if you're selling out in a matter of weeks, you must be doing it at an economic model where you make money, right?
Yep.
So I think it has to exist. Whether it's going to be WeWork or it's going to be some other company that takes the reins, I don't know. But the fact that it can be burning from the inside as such a strong company ready to IPO just kind of puts Silicon Valley into perspective, and this whole growth at any cost mindset, which I think is quite dangerous. I think we've kind of forgotten what it looks like to build a profitable business from day one, right? Kind of how people think about startups these days is we're going to grow to X amount of users, we're going to get as much growth as possible, and then we're going to turn on profitability down the line. A lot of people forgetting about the fact you actually can build a business, and I would argue should build a business by having a profitable business model from day one. And it doesn't sound crazy. It sounds like common sense, but when you look in the market, you don't see it.
100%. I think organic growth is always kind of the most sustainable and most kind of risk averse way of doing it. So I completely agree there. If we look at another story this past week, which I suppose is kind of on the same theme really, South African Airways, the national carrier of South Africa, 85 years old. Basically a mass strike going on for the past 7 days as we record this podcast. I mean, I actually overheard basically an interview on Bruce Whitfield's Money Show with one of the board members, who's kind of put a rough estimate of a minimum of 52 million rand losses per day. Now, obviously, they can't quantify this more than that in terms of customers who are obviously looking at this strike happening and are holding back on future bookings. But just in terms of the flights that are landed, basically the flights that are grounded, not taking off in the kind of current running of the airline, that's his sort of a minimum estimate. I mean, basically to put a bit of context on how it's got here. If we look at SAA over the last 10 years, they've had sort of 9 CEOs, a lot of mismanagement, a lot of corruption. In terms of the bailouts from government, if we look at the last 3 years, government has handed them 20 billion rand, and basically are now at a stage where government can't afford to do that anymore. South African government obviously has had a lot of corruption in itself as well, and are now actually holding back those paychecks. So, I mean, what do you make of this? What is it feeling like that side?
Yeah, it looks like a mess. It looks like a mess, and it has looked like a mess for a long time now.
Yeah.
I think SAA has been one of those state-owned enterprises that has been the brunt of a lot of the cynicism and a lot of the concern about the country. Mostly because, as you say, those economics don't make sense, right? And the fact that these bailouts have to keep coming and coming and coming is not a good sign at all. But also, it's reputational damage for South Africa. Definitely. So your national airline is a big part of reputation, and for a lot of tourists who are coming to the country for the first time, that might be their first experience with your country.
100%.
And if your national airline is under stress and is not like operating the way it should, it really paints a bad picture on South Africa and affects tourism and affects all the other spending that you want from foreigners in the rest of the place. Yep. So it's a really dangerous place to get things wrong, right? And so reputationally, it's not good for South Africa. And I'm not quite sure what the solution is. I'm really hoping they find a way to turn it around. But when you read story after story after story after story about how things keep getting worse, I'm not sure where the savior comes from. And
I think to add on that, I think if the strike continues for much longer, I think it is very, very possible that we might see those doors close. Unfortunately, I mean, kind of hearing stats of, so basically the reason for these strikes is obviously wages. Workers are looking for 8%. The current proposal in place is 5.9%. Now, I mean, looking at this, I've seen that South Africa's inflation is at its lowest point in the last 9 years at 3.7%. I mean, is 5.9% a reasonable sort of proposal when your inflation rate is sitting at 3.7? I mean, certainly looking at the past rolls I've had in the UK, increases are generally inflationary if there's no sort of other factors there. You haven't got a new role, new responsibilities, those kinds of things. Is this a reasonable proposal at face value, or do you think there's other things under play here?
Yeah, so it's really hard to answer that question. I don't know what reasonable looks like because, to be honest, I don't think that labor unions are looking at inflation really as a marker. I think they've got some idea in their mind as to what's a fair price for their work, sure, and under whatever working conditions they're working under. 100%. Yeah. And so it might look somewhat reasonable on the face of it, but I don't have any information to make a comment on that really.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's what I don't like about it is how long it's taking to negotiate. Yeah. Right. So I understand you're always going to have a negotiation. You're always going to have to come to some sort of compromise. That's how it works. What I want to see is the negotiations sped up and come to some sort of agreement so that we can move on. I'm not sure what the right number is. I don't think anyone does.
Sure, no,
it would be easier if they did.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think making it a bit tricky as well is kind of a bit of a catch-22, is based on the solvency and liquidity of the business at the moment, the board is really concerned at the moment about reckless trading, as we know that Companies Act legislation that actually has personal implications for directors involved, and pushing that envelope a little bit further on this negotiation, definitely that's a piece of legislation that will need to be considered for this airline.
Yeah, definitely. So we have to watch this space and see what happens. Hopefully they figure it out.
100%. Cool. I know we've already covered two things, but let's give a quick high level over some of the other things in this week. Obviously, as we spoke about last week, the UK general election is ticking on. What came to my attention was the party called Green, the Green Party. To be honest, it's actually been going for a bit of time. As far as I know, there's one seat in Parliament. And as far as I know, there's kind of a total of 650. So at the moment, the representation there is not big. But in recent time, we've seen a lot of protests, an organisation group called Extinction Rebellion. I've certainly seen it in London disrupting the streets, basically putting blockades, and in one case even getting on top of a tube, really forcing
on top of the tube,
standing on top of the tube.
Sure.
One of the members actually basically jumped on top of the tube, which wasn't a great idea, because the train and the tube system is actually a sustainable way of travel in terms of it's people who are not driving cars, it's people who are looking to be more care about the environment a bit more. So that was an interesting one. But I mean, I suppose my wider question here is it time for the world to have green and sort of eco-friendly political parties? I mean, their promise is to get the UK to a zero carbon footprint by 2030. Is it time for something like that?
I'm always a little bit skeptical about political parties who base their entire platform on one particular issue, right?
Yeah.
So I'm always a little bit skeptical about that, because it's much more complicated than that. Even if they say they can achieve what they want to achieve, once they're actually in power, they often find that it's a lot harder to get these things through Parliament and into action than you need to be, right?
Yeah.
So I'm always a little bit skeptical of that. I think it's a trend we need to be seeing from all political parties, right? I've been a firm believer that we should be seeing carbon credits and some sort of free market solution to try and tackle climate change for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's an economic decision that needs to be made by the country itself and by the world. I don't think you're going to have a green party that's going to come in and campaign on just one issue like that and actually get through. I think that you need to have more nuance and understand that even if you promise zero carbon by 2030, that's incredibly ambitious, right?
100%.
And so for people who are looking to vote for them, they look at that stat and they wonder, is it actually achievable?
Yeah.
Is it actually possible? And while they might agree with the cause and they might support the party, I don't think you're going to get majority through that. I think that needs to come from an economic decision-making place where we say, cool, as a country, we're going to decide that climate change matters, and it really does, and we should be trying to fight it, and then put policies in place to try and incentivize the right behavior. I don't know what you think, Chad.
No, I completely agree. In terms of each of the campaigns, I definitely think it would be nice to, even for the major parties, see some sort of thought and consideration about this. I mean, this last week, Sir David Attenborough, the renowned, nature documentary, basically, him coming out saying that the world is changing their habits on plastic, which is a positive thing to see. Just in terms of kind of where we're getting, I mean, I think it's definitely important for us to start thinking about our sustainability and the level of eco-friendly we are to the environment. I mean, I think if we look at something like the water shortage in Cape Town, which happened sort of 2 years ago, it's one of those things we're always talking about climate change. We're always talking about water, save water, be water wise, and that kind of thing. And I feel like until we get to that stage where we're at a crisis, people are not really thinking about it. So I think it would be good, as you said, to get some of those parties just to bring it into their standard policies anyway. I think on the same theme, in this last week, there was a debate between the Labour and Conservative Party. And I thought you would find this one quite interesting from an ethics point of view, because I know, Barry has, as we spoke about the last time, is studying AI from an ethics point of view too, and both of our courses focused quite heavily on ethics. Basically, one of the official Twitter accounts of the Conservative Party, during the debate, they actually changed their name, their Twitter handle, to Fact Check UK, and were essentially dismissing all of the points made by the Labour Party, kind of portraying themselves as an independent fact-checking account. I think that's quite misleading, and I mean, don't you think, given kind of all of the data scandals we've had in the past and how the role that social media plays in news, don't you think this is quite a below the belt move?
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it also sounds quite stupid, really. I mean, I don't know how they thought they were going to get away with it. It's quite transparent when that is happening, especially during a debate. Do you have any sense of what they were trying to accomplish with it? I know you said trying to refute the Labour Party's ideas, but why did they think this would work, and what were they trying to accomplish with it?
I mean, good question. I mean, I think they were really just trying to pull the wool over people's eyes by, as I say, dismissing what Labour's claims, and essentially putting compliments to all of the points of the Conservative Party. So, I mean, I definitely think, as you say, it was a stupid move, and I mean, given today's day and age, why would you even try and do something like that? There's been a backlash from Twitter themselves, kind of as a bit of a warning, actually, that any verified account who, changes their name, there may be implications. So definitely a silly move. And I think just from the purposes of this podcast, I think anyone who didn't know of it, we're certainly not taking sides, but I think it's definitely something to be brought to the fore, and everyone should be aware of it.
Definitely. I think the timing as well is a bit ill thought out, because Twitter's in the last couple of weeks has really been going hard on politics, and they've banned political advertising on their platform, and they've taken quite a tough stance against political messaging and that kind of stuff. So I think it's dangerous to alienate a huge platform like Twitter, which has such influence around the world.
Yep, 100% agree. Cool, let's move on to our next insert. Stuff I found interesting.
Oh yes, the jingle is in action. The jingle is in action.
The jingle is in action. I'm going to again hand this one over to Barry to basically let us know what he found interesting this week. I believe there's a prop involved.
There is a prop involved. I brought it with me. So for those who are watching on video, hopefully you'll be able to see it there.
Yep.
It is a book called Leonardo da Vinci, the biography. It's written by Walter Isaacson, who is my favorite biographer. He did the Steve Jobs autobiography. He's done a Benjamin Franklin one. He's done a lot of famous people, and does an incredible job at writing up on their stories. So I picked this up a long time ago, probably about a year ago, and I've been slowly moving my way through it. And I wanted to bring it up because Leonardo da Vinci for me was someone I knew very little about a year or two ago, and I've learned a hell of a lot about him in the last little bit, and he's even more fascinating than I thought. So about 2 years ago, I kind of knew him as the guy who painted the Mona Lisa, right? That's the name I knew. I knew the Mona Lisa. I knew nothing about why the Mona Lisa was special. I didn't know much about art itself. I just knew he was known as this artistic genius, right? Then I've had the privilege of having two of my ex-girlfriends be very, very big into art history.
What a privilege.
So what a privilege. It was great. And I learned a lot about art through those two relationships, and got more of an appreciation and more of an understanding of what makes Leonardo da Vinci so powerful. And then I picked up this book, and it really changed my whole view on him, right? So he's kind of known in most people's eyes as a painter, as a famous painter who's done incredible works all around the world, and his pieces are worth millions and millions of dollars, and they are like priceless pieces, right? And that's kind of how everyone sees him. But you read this biography, you get a real sense that he's so much more than just a painter. He was an engineer, an architect, a metal worker, a philosopher, a writer, a poet. He's one of the most creative people I've ever had the chance to read about.
Yep.
And he did all of this stuff hundreds of years ago when this stuff wasn't really in vogue, right? So the number of inventions that he's come up with that he couldn't make happen back then because engineering just wasn't ready yet, but then happened 200 years later, is terrifying. He feels like a prophet in some way by the kind of stuff that he predicted and the kind of stuff that he designed. The best known example of that is the helicopter, right? So in one of his old notebooks, he's got a full-on drawing and design for a fully working helicopter that couldn't be built at that time because things weren't ready and the engineering wasn't possible. But 200 years later, it is ready, and it happens. And so that's one example of many that kind of permeate through this book. So it really is a fantastic book that kind of looks at what does this kind of genius look like? What kind of struggles and personal struggles did he have to go through? One of the biggest things was that he was a gay man, and back then it was impossible to be a gay man. Sure. So he talks a lot about the personal struggles that he went through, living in a world that didn't accept him, and were kind of living off his genius. So they weren't seeing him as a human being, they were seeing him as this painter or this engineer or this genius. And how that impacted him socially and impacted him psychologically. So it really is a fascinating look at what an old school genius looks like, how creative and how curious he was, and that he was so much more than just the guy who painted the Mona Lisa. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up. I would encourage anyone to go and check it out. He really is a fascinating historical figure. You read the book and you kind of are amazed by what he's done and how little people actually talk about him. But he's a fascinating character.
Amazing. I mean, the world was lucky to have him. I'd certainly say, and how sad that he couldn't be himself in the age that he lived. Luckily, we kind of moving out of that phase, which is great. But I mean, do you think there are any kind of modern geniuses of the sort of stature or kind of nature of people like Da Vinci anymore? I mean, I don't know if it's just you, but I certainly feel like civilization has kind of going a little bit backwards in terms of these geniuses who revolutionized the way that the world worked in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's something. It's the natural first question that you ask yourself when you read a book like this, right? Is where is today's Leonardo? Yeah. Like who is the name that our great grandchildren will be talking about in a few hundred years? I don't know. The kind of the sense that I get is that in today's age, we are told to specialize in one thing, right? Yeah. The route to success is becoming really, really good at one specific thing in one niche, and we dedicate our entire lives to being the best in the world at that thing. I find it hard to see today someone who's going to become a genius in 4 or 5 different areas, like Leonardo did. And obviously, a lot of that's because the world has moved a lot since then, and there was a lot more to discover back then than there is to discover now. So that's one factor. But I think that we've got so focused on specialization, and we kind of say jack of all trades, and we kind of stigmatize the person who's generally good at a bunch of things, that I don't see how another Leonardo is going to come into being. That being said, no one saw him coming, right? Yep. So you could have someone popping out of the woodwork at some stage, and these kind of brains only come one every 100 years. So who knows?
Absolutely fascinating. Let's hope we do have somebody of that sort of level coming through the ranks at some stage. The next one is something that I actually brought up, coming from The Crown. So season 3 was released this last week. Very exciting. We've been waiting for it for the last sort of 2 years. So basically, when myself and my fiance moved over to London, we obviously had this fascination with the royals and the monarchy. And this series, The Crown, is an incredible series done in a really, really good way. It's entertaining and at the same time is educating, really, which I find fascinating. Have you watched any of The Crown?
I've actually never heard of it, Chad. So when you put it on, I was quite excited because I'm looking for a new series. So please tell me what The Crown is about and what it tries to accomplish.
So basically, it's entertainment. It's entertainment at its core, really. It's a series that is essentially telling you the story of the monarchy, essentially all the way from how Queen Elizabeth II became queen. It wasn't her natural path of progression, but she is there now, and essentially takes you through her life. And we are kind of now at the sort of Middle Ages, so that as she's moved on, which is where we are now in season 3. But just in terms of the kind of amount of work that they put in to get something that is authentic, something that feels real, is absolutely incredible. They would kind of take people on who were in the royal palace at the time, and really through every single interaction, kind of get the level of detail of, is this the way that they would have said it? Or, how would they have said it? Who would have been standing where? All of that type of stuff. It's absolutely incredible and really realistic. So I'd say, kind of the amount of work they've put in to achieve that is really groundbreaking and really rewarding. Sorry, Barry?
Don't you think it's amazing? Sorry, on a little bit of a sidetrack. Do you think it's amazing the production quality we see in TV these days?
100%. Yeah.
We're seeing the kind of production quality we used to only be able to see on the big screen, and now it's coming to Netflix and those kind of streaming services. Don't you think it's amazing that it's finally on TV?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really amazing thing because of the fact that now we have these streaming services. You no longer have to have one TV package that covers a bunch of channels, of which you would probably only watch 1 or 2. Instead, it's kind of like scrap all those channels. We are going to pay for the ones that we actually use, and kind of the result of that is we have these providers who have capital. They have a massive base of monthly users who are putting in good subscriptions subscriptions. Obviously, we've seen Apple has introduced theirs as well, and it'll be interesting to see the content that comes out of that club too. But I think definitely in terms of improving the quality of television that we're seeing, I think now that we've switched to the streaming world, I think it's definitely made a difference. And we certainly spend a lot of our time on Netflix. So I completely agree there. In terms of the thing that actually made me put this one down on stuff I found interesting, there's an episode, I think it's episode 3 of this season 3, which actually covers the Aberfan disaster in Wales. Now, I had never heard of this before, but it is...
Yeah, neither have I.
Absolutely tragic. I mean, essentially a small town in Wales, which was, kind of a mining town, had a massive coal heap, and basically, as a result of excessive rains, there were 144 deaths, which of which 116 were children. So essentially, a lot of rain. I think in the episode they kind of make allusions to government not doing their part in this heap becoming too big, having too much of a risk. And essentially, there was a collapse, and all of this coal basically flattened, various housing blocks, and most importantly, the school. Which was, kind of at the bottom of this village. And essentially, this episode, as I said, really heartbreaking in terms of what these people have gone through. Just something I hadn't heard of. I mean, this is something that happened in 1966, not that long ago. Something that I found really interesting is when they were kind of going through the research and putting together this episode. They essentially went to the village, of course, and got people who were actually there when it happened, and kind of got their perspectives as well. I think really important is in all these articles I've read from the makers, they really tried to go about this quite delicately. Of course, it's still raw, and so the thing that I found quite on the lighter side is they actually provided counseling to a lot of these people, and a lot of these people have not had counseling for the past 53 years, and it's still very raw. I mean, having to stand at a funeral and looking at I think the biggest burial that there was. It's one scene where you've got literally 80 odd graves of little children standing in front of you is absolutely tragic. And I mean, I think it's really good that the makers are not just sort of profiting out of making entertainment out of this, but are actually putting back in terms of providing real good counseling, which should have really been there for a while.
That is fascinating, and I think that's what art can do, right? Art can open these opportunities to build community and to right wrongs of the past. And so while it's a very, as long as you do it tactfully, like you say, and as long as you do it with grace and with humility, hopefully this helps the people that were affected and can kind of give some sort of closure to the whole thing, which sounds traumatic. Yeah,
and I think it's also, I think it has a really positive effect, the fact that they did decide to bring this into the series, because now this basically the world are asking about this event that a lot of people haven't heard of, and just in terms of how do we make sure that these types of things don't happen again, in terms of kind of natural type disasters, but where you can put into place some remedial action ahead of time. It's done a good for society. I think for them to add this into the series. Also, one thing that I found really interesting was the crisis that this was for the monarchy. So a natural disaster basically turned political, really, in terms of, as I said, all of the parties, the party of the day, and specifically the Queen, and how the people, expect the Queen to react, and what they kind of expect of their Queen. So the Queen actually didn't arrive until 8 days had passed, since the event. And based on this episode, it sounded like a lot of people had to kind of prompt and essentially threaten, political kind of unrest before she actually made an appearance. But yeah, a very difficult situation, I think, and certainly the suggestion that they give at the end of the episode, which is that this is one of the Queen's biggest regrets in her tenure. not having gone there until 8 days had passed since the tragedy. So yeah, I mean, I would certainly, on a sort of larger note, I would highly recommend watching The Crown. I think it's a fascinating series in terms of the entertainment value as well as the educational value. Obviously, the royal family and the monarchy, a very kind of unique system, and I think it's really good to get a slight peek as behind the doors as to what actually goes on around there. So shall we move on to our next one?
Let's do it.
Looking ahead.
Alrighty, so this is something that I've been talking a lot about in the last couple of months, and so I thought it'd be a great opportunity to bring it up. In a lot of my trips, I've taken quite a few financial trips, so taking bankers overseas and looking at what does the future of financial services look like. And one of the trends that we've been seeing is that when banks are looking at the future, a lot of their competitors are not going to be banks. Right, we're seeing a lot of other companies getting into financial services and getting into the financial system in a really big way. Yeah. So, for example, Apple released their credit card recently. Google are looking into checking accounts. You've got Libra, which is like the pseudo cryptocurrency that Facebook and others are putting together. You've got Uber Money. You've got Starbucks, who's got this giant cash liability on their balance because of all the points that people are racking up. Yeah. And so, what you're seeing these large tech companies coming into traditional financial services and scaring the pants off these big banks who are worried about losing their power, right? Previously, all the transactions were kind of monopolized by big financial banks. And we're seeing now that if you provide a better user experience with a better brand, with like some sort of other incentives, people might be tempted to start moving out of traditional financial services and into these kind of tech giants.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's going to take a long time, and a lot of these tech guys are working with traditional financial service providers to make that transition happen.
100%.
But I was curious to hear your thoughts, Chad, on what you think the future of this looks like. Do you see a future where you don't have an account with a bank, but you have a Facebook balance with Facebook money in it? And what did that future look like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, to touch on our conversation last week, I mean, this is really worrying for kind of all of those concerned about privacy and that kind of thing. For me, I'm definitely stuck in the past in terms of traditional banks. However, that said, in the UK and in London, there are loads of fintech companies who are kind of challenging the status quo of what a normal bank means and what it does and its function. And so I've definitely switched over to those sorts of entities. But do I think I would be merging my social account with a bank balance? I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, if we look at the Google and the Apple example, so I believe they've teamed up with Goldman Sachs. They've got a consumer arm which was released, I think it was actually last year, kind of early bit of last year, if not the tail end of the year before, called Marcus. So where I basically saw this come about is in London, obviously, given the extremely low inflation rate, it's really hard to get money market type interest returns on investments. I mean, in South Africa, your inflation rate is incredibly high, and I think just on a sort of money market type account, it wouldn't be unusual to see sort of returns of 10%. Now, what Marcus did is they came out and advertised returns of 1.5%, and believe it or not, that is sort of the highest on a money market basis. So yeah, interesting for me that Google and Apple are teaming up with them. I think, as you said, in terms of the reasons that they're partnering up with some of these established banks is certainly regulation. I mean, I think the concerns for bank regulators are a gap in financial oversight. Having come from a sort of banking articles experience, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's something that is changing very, very fast. And the technology, as always, is way ahead of the regulation, right? Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to see banking systems in a number of different countries. So I've got an interesting perspective on what it looks like on a global perspective. So if we look at Singapore as an example, Singapore is really leading the game when it comes to this regulation. In the last 12 months, I must get the number right, I think they've awarded 17 new banking licenses in the last 12 months, which is unheard of, right? Like normally these things are 1 or 2 a year, if that. Yeah. And so Singapore, their approach is basically saying, we can become a sandbox. You come to Singapore, you test out your stuff, we see how it interacts in a Singaporean landscape, and then once you've got it figured out, then you export to the rest of Asia and the rest of the world. So that's one example of a country trying to let the regulation go a little bit and let it be a little bit looser.
Yeah.
Where you look at other places like, say, the States or even South Africa, where it's very, very tight, there's a lot less room for innovation in that perspective. And so people are trying to do things outside of traditional regulation.
Yeah.
So there's pros and cons to each of those scenarios. I think that the whole cryptocurrency boom has kind of caused a little bit of mud in the water as well, because a lot of people get confused between what crypto is and what like fintech innovation is, and they're not always the same thing, and they're often not the same thing. So regulating cryptocurrency is very different to regulating a digital bank, for example. So I think that distinction needs to be more clearly demarcated, especially in regulation. And I think that for countries that are looking to push innovation, they want to be the next New York or the next London or the next Hong Kong, they're going to have to take some risk when it comes to that. And like you say, like you're not going to know the implications of that risk until 20, 30, 40 years down the line.
Definitely.
So I think it's very interesting to watch. I don't know what the right answer is, but what I do know for certain is that the financial system in 50 years' time is going to look very different to today's.
Yep.
And how we're going to get there, I'm not sure.
Just out of interest, I mean, while we're on this topic, is Apple Pay and Google Pay and kind of Garmin Pay and all of those kinds of things, are they now beginning to be accepted in South Africa?
I think what's interesting about South Africa is that I think we were one of the first countries to have tap and go on our credit cards in the first place, right? So all of those payment mechanisms are available, and as far as I know, some merchants do use them, but tap and go has been happening here for the last 5 or 6 years. And so like when I went to the States and it's still very, very new, I was a bit surprised because it felt like I've been having it for 5 or 6 years. So when you've got tap and go on your credit card, there's no real need for consumer to switch to an Apple Pay or a Samsung Pay just yet. So that's why I think it hasn't taken off in a big way here. Also, I think the brand strength here is a little bit weaker than some other places around the world, where if you're an Apple fanatic, you want to go and pay with Apple Pay and whatnot. But I think the fact that South Africa had tap and go credit cards so early in the game really kind of slowed down the progress of Samsung Pay and all those kinds of things. What about in London? What do you see in London?
Well, yeah, I mean, to talk about the benefit of having a card versus phone scenario, I definitely, I mean, myself personally, find Apple Pay to be extremely compelling, especially when you've got public transport. I mean, who wants to, take out their wallet, take out another card, when you can literally just, the phone's already in your hand, quickly double tap a button, and obviously authenticated via fingerprint or your face or whatever the case is, and you through the gantry and that kind of thing. So I mean, certainly moving over from SA to here, I definitely saw very quickly that it's quite a bit more advanced, especially in terms of the fintechs. So the sort of startups. I mean, already here, I don't want to kind of leave any out, but we've got some fairly big ones. Monzo, which has actually got a fully fledged banking license. We've got Starling, Revolut. These are basically all digital banks that are, completely saying no to the sort of model of having actual, outlets where you can go in and do your banking. On the sort of back of that, they give you extra flexibility. I mean, certainly for traveling, one of these apps, for example, lets you hold multiple currencies at one given moment. You then get analytics on your spending on each of these currencies. There's one that can even automatically pick up your location, and when you're out of the country, activate a travel insurance policy. So we're definitely seeing some great innovation happening this side, and it's certainly going to be interesting to see where it goes to from here. I think something that I saw that was a little bit concerning, just to go back to our discussion last week, is the possibility that a Google bank or a sort of Facebook bank, I'm just calling them that, would give them an extra layer of information in terms of how effective their ad campaigns are, in terms of click-through and ultimately, finalizing that purchase. I mean, do you think they will actually be using this information, or do you think this is us again looking too deeply into this?
No, you're spot on. That's exactly the reason they're doing it, right? Their game is using as much data as possible to target those ads as best as they can. So that's the reason they're doing it. Whether the regulations are going to allow for it, or whether they're going to have to put some sort of Chinese wall in place, or they're going to try and find some way to avoid it. What it does is it gives these big tech giants another chance to establish their monopoly and make it very hard for a newcomer to compete, right? If you've got the banking information, the social information, your location data, etc., you know this person backwards. So it's a very, very tricky one. It's obviously, as you say, it's very convenient for the user and it makes your life a bit easier. And it's again what we talked about last time. It's like the user experience versus the privacy that you're giving up. And it's been interesting to see where they go with it. First of all, it's going to be interesting to see if they can succeed, right? Just because they open up these products doesn't mean there's going to be mass adoption, and they're still going to have to prove it in the marketplace. But if one of these things goes huge and gets some sort of network effect behind it and really becomes a powerful player, it's going to really terrify the rest of the banks and terrify the regulators, because it's going to be something in completely new territory.
I mean, in terms of that mind shift, how long do you think it would take for people like me who are thinking a little bit more traditionally? I mean, I say I'm thinking traditionally, but I have switched over to these fintech companies. For me, the next step being, as you say, having a sort of Facebook or Google bank account as well. I mean, how long do you think that lag would take? And do you think the banks should be worried certainly in the next couple of years, or do you think it's a longer term question?
I think it's a longer term question. I think that people are often over optimistic about how quickly these things change. Yep. When you're talking about people's money, it's one of the parts of their life that they are most conservative about. They're most resistant to change, right? If you're going to change your messaging app, you'll change in an instant. If you're going to change your social platform, you'll change in an instant, right? Your money is very, very dear and very important to people, and so it takes a while to change that behavior. That being said, if you look at the millennial generation, the generation that we're a part of, we tend to change much quicker than our parents did. Yep. And so you wonder if the generation after us, if they grow up with this fintech and they grow up not having those preconceived ideas as to what a bank actually looks like, they might be the ones that drive that change. And we might be the old fogies sitting there thinking, why are these kids giving up all of this information, right?
Yep.
And so I think it's not our generation, it's going to be the one that comes after us. And what kind of banking systems do they grow up in? And how does that shape the way they think about their money?
I think the other thing here is, what does that actually mean for your credit record? I mean, traditionally, basically, the longer you stayed at a bank, you're seen to be more reliable and to be more trustworthy. Do you think we'll maybe see some changes here with all of these quick switches and as you say, increasingly becoming less jump, kind of less cautious of jumping? Do you think we'll see changes in something as important to consumers as a credit record?
I think so, and I think we're seeing that shift already. A lot of the big fintechs that I've managed to meet with over the last couple of months are in the credit space, and all of them are trying to unlock new ways to assess someone's credit. So how do you use new data? How do you use other data? Previously, you'd use your proof of residence, your pay slip, your kind of traditional documents that prove a certain thing about you.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of companies that are trying to do weird and wonderful things with all sorts of data when it comes to your emails or the way you message or the way you handle your phone or the way you drive and yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
So I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in the space, especially as there's still a huge portion of the world who's not in the traditional financial system because they don't have those stable paychecks or they don't have the documentation or they don't have access to a certain banking infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I think that the way of assessing credit has to change to keep up with the world and keep up with how people are moving from job to job and bank to bank and yada, yada, yada. And so there's lots of opportunity in that space to become a third-party provider to gather that data, analyze it, assess it, and then provide some sort of rating that a financial institution can take seriously. Yep. So I think we're going to see a lot of change there, lots of innovation I'm seeing in the space, and so I'm quite excited about that as an opportunity. And we'll have to see what that does when it comes to how banks think about their consumers.
Fascinating. Must be absolutely fascinating being in that space and actually seeing how it's changing and all of the new opportunities that people are actually grabbing by the horns. So yeah, I mean, if that sounds like you, certainly get in touch with Barry because he's definitely in the space and has great information on that. Should we move on to the next one?
Let's do it.
Develop and grow.
So our next one is develop and grow, and we're looking at two things that I'm going to take very, very short on. Basically, I'm trying to use my own advice against myself and make public accountability my thing. Yeah. So basically, as mentioned in the last episode, I'm slowly moving into the field of artificial intelligence, and I've been coming at it from a non-technical perspective. So working in ethics and policy work and that kind of stuff. But what I've seen is that in order to have the right impact or the amount of impact that I want to have, I need to build some technical fundamentals. Basically, I need to learn to code. And so what I've been trying to do is trying to find ways of learning to code in my free time that is hopefully going to give me enough fundamental understanding to be able to have an intelligent conversation. I'm not really expecting to compete with the guys who've been coding since they were 4 years old, because I'm never going to catch them. But at least to learn some basic things so that I can have an intelligent conversation and understand what is possible in this world.
100%.
So in doing that, I came across this project which is called #100 Days of Code. And it's really, really simple. What you do is you go into your Twitter account and you announce, cool, I am going to start 100 days of code. And what you have to do then is for every single day after that, up to 100, you try and do you do 1 hour of coding that day, right?
Wow.
And so the idea is just try and build a habit. And then what you do is after you've done that hour, you go back onto Twitter and you tweet with the hashtag and you say, cool, I did this course and I did this lecture, or I coded this piece of this project, or whatever the story is. You just tell the world what you coded. And what's been really cool is that there's a community built around that hashtag.
Amazing.
And so you'll get messages from all around the world congratulating you, supporting you, and helping you on that journey of learning to code.
Amazing.
So I started this thing before I went traveling, and I did about 14 or 15 days then. Then I went traveling and lost it completely, that's why I'm trying to bring it up again.
All about
setting
up those systems for next year.
Exactly. I didn't set up the systems when I was traveling, so that's why I'm using my own advice against myself here, and that's why I'm bringing it up. So I'm planning to get started again, and I think I'm on day 15 or 16, somewhere around there.
Awesome.
So if you'd like to follow along, please follow me on Twitter and come join. And if you want to join me doing it, I'd love to have some fellow coders in the room. So if you are going to join, let me know.
Amazing. Just to confirm, what is that Twitter handle again?
It's at Barry Maurice. BarryMorisse.
I mean, and then just in terms of kind of the framework you're setting yourself here. I mean, there's so many different programming languages. I know. Programming logic is typically generic. You've got loops, you've got arrays, and I think kind of getting to know all of those types of things will definitely be useful in all platforms. But does 100 Days of Code specify a programming language? What is the kind of main one we're seeing on the community?
Yeah, so the quickest way to not finishing 100 days of code is spending the first 21 days debating what language to start in, right? So what they say is that, like you say, the principles are what matters. So the actual principles of what coding looks like is what matters. The syntax or the language you use doesn't matter, right? So the key thing for me is just start in whatever language comes to you first, or whatever you find that works for you. Obviously, think a bit about what you want to accomplish. So if you're looking to make websites, maybe HTML and CSS is a better place to start.
Yep.
If you're looking at machine learning like I am, it's often Python and those kind of languages. But just pick one. Honestly, just pick one. It doesn't matter at this stage. What you're trying to do in the first 100 days is build those principles and get an understanding of what coding looks like and how to think about creating programs. A lot of it is pure problem solving and logic, right?
Yep.
So that learning is transferable beyond just code. So even if I finish 100 days of code and I never do another day of coding in my life, the work of just thinking about how a coder thinks about a problem is valuable.
100%.
So I'm starting in Python, but please just pick one and go. Don't take forever debating it. It really doesn't matter at this stage.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, definitely if you want to follow Barry along on that journey or even join in, I think that would be great to see listeners getting involved in as well. And I mean, I think, in today's, in today's world, I think coding is fundamental really for anyone who is kind of even the slightest bit entrepreneurial in their thinking. I think, as you say, just knowing the realm of possibility in terms of, what types of programs you could make, even if that's not your goal now to, come up with something, you might at some stage get to a point in life where you realize there's something missing and something that you could add to the world. And I think having that ability and that logical way of putting together a program that could solve that, I think this is a very kind of noble quest, and I think it's going to just better civilization as well. So everyone definitely get involved in #100 Days of Code. Then the next one, this is quite a bold one, Barry.
Oh, jeez. Okay. I put this down again with trying to force some public accountability on myself, right? So, social media. I have a serious love-hate relationship with it. It is it is to credit for a lot of the opportunities that I've been lucky enough to have in the last couple of years by being able to share all my stuff and communicate to people all around the world about things that I'm interested in. I found tremendous value in it, and I think it's a fantastic platform. On the other side of the coin, I can also find myself becoming addicted to it and spending way too much time scrolling through unnecessary stuff.
Yeah.
And so what I've done for the last 2 years is I've taken the whole of December off of social media.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is deleting the apps off of my phone and only posting things that I've scheduled. So for example, a blog post that I want to publish or a podcast episode or something like that. So I've got scheduled stuff that happens during December.
Right.
But when it comes to my daily scrolling, I'm trying to stay away from it. I first did this 2 years ago, and it was a really, really tough month because I become really addicted to it.
Yeah.
And I would find myself reaching for my phone and tapping on where the Facebook app used to be, and it just wasn't there. And I'd be like a bit terrified by how like habitual it had become.
Yep.
And so that kind of showed me that maybe it's worth it taking a little bit of a break every now and then. And December for me is that time because a lot of stuff is very quiet. All my friends go away. It's kind of a chilled month.
Yep.
And so I'm hoping to do that again this year, take December off social media and just kind of spend some more time reading and thinking and creating stuff rather than just consuming all of the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a little bit ironic because we are talking to you and you probably found this podcast through social media. so I understand the irony and I understand the hypocrisy here. So what I'm saying is come onto social media, listen to the Across the Pond and then switch it off.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen this research that suggests, an endless fascination with social media has got negative effects on how you see yourself. Basically, comparing yourself to people, who are posting those highlight shots from their life. That is not the sort of true and realistic representation of what their life looks like. It's just what they choose to share. So I think that can only be a healthy break. And I definitely wish you luck there. I haven't done a month of no social media myself ever.
I think it's an experiment that's worth running. It doesn't have to be a month, but if you can find, a lot of people do like say 1 day a week. So they'll say Sundays, they turn it off completely, or you start with a week, or you start with a few days. Take it easy at the beginning, but what I think you'll find is when you give it a go and you get through that 2 or 3 day period where you keep going back and you realize, oh, it's not there, you'll find that there's a lot of benefit to it. And so we have to think more carefully about how we use these tools and understand that everything in moderation. It's that old saying, everything in moderation. They are supremely powerful and they give you so much connection to the world.
Definitely.
But at the same time, if you're spending too much time on that, you're not actually living in the present. And so for anyone who is feeling like they're on their phone too much, I'd recommend try a few days, try 1 day, try a week, whatever it takes for you, and just put those apps away and kind of live your life in the present and see what you feel like, and then make a decision based on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the introduction of the screen time feature on Apple systems has definitely been healthy in kind of just making us aware of the hours and hours we spend on these platforms. I mean, it's an infinite scroll. At the end of the day, I mean, you really, of course, there's algorithms to kind of position which ones you'll find more enjoyable at the top. But I mean, it certainly does start to feel at some point like a task, like it's something on your to-do list. You kind of have to look through each of these stories. And I mean, I've had it on occasions where you kind of start to get to the end of that top vertical story list. And when you go back to the beginning, the first 3 or 4 people who, you're watching their stories, there's more posts there again. And so it's this kind of overwhelming workload, if you'd like, that you can kind of never get through. And I think taking a break of that and really removing that from your priority list of things to do is certainly refreshing. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, this one's all yours, Chad.
What's on your mind?
Cool. So as we mentioned in week 1, this is our section of the podcast where we look onto the listener and really look at what's on everyone's mind. So we received a voice note for this one. Let's quickly give it a play.
Hey, so my question of the day would be, should you be buying Christmas presents for mates?
Right. So that was Jean-Marc who sent that through. To be honest, Barry, this is quite an unethical move on my part, but I'm conflicted on this one because I'm actually friends with Jean-Marc. So I'm going to pass this one on to you. What do you think?
I was hoping you weren't going to do that. I was hoping you were going to answer the question first. Okay, so I feel like a terrible human being, right? I'm really bad with gifts. All my friends and family will know. I forget it's their birthday for the first part. I'm very uncreative when I'm thinking of gifts. Like, I often end up running around the day before trying to find something.
Yep.
And I'm not a gift giving person, right? So I'm not, when you look at the love languages, I'm not a gift giving or receiving person. I don't really care about gifts, but I know the people in my life care about it. So I think that for me is the thing. If your mate, if that shows how you care for that guy or how you love that person, then that makes sense. Definitely. And then I think it's worth doing it because that's a fantastic kind of gesture. But I've got a lot of friends who would find it weird if I gave them a Christmas present. So I think it's a case by case basis. For me, I kind of default to the no gift. I kind of save Christmas gifts for my immediate family and a partner, whatever the story is. But if you've got mates who really care about that and it really makes a difference to them, then I think it's worth it. So what are you going to do for Jean?
I mean, putting me on the spot there. I mean, I think one thing that's important is every relationship kind of sets up its own sort of boundaries and the way that things work. And so how I look at it is, if in the last 3, 4, 5 years you haven't given each other gifts, why change that up? However, if there is that level of tradition, or as we would call, again, I'm sorry to throw in another accounting joke, a sort of constructive a constructive obligation, i.e. an obligation that arises as a result of you having done things in the past, then I certainly would do that again and kind of honor that obligation if you'd like. But I certainly think if you are bought a gift by your friend, I think it's only common courtesy to return it. But and then certainly if you're doing a kind of Christmas function with friends, I think in that sort of occasion, I would definitely bring something small along as well. Thanks for your question, Jay. Oh, sorry, Barry, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, there's one more idea to support out the function. Yeah. Secret Santa's a lot of fun, right? So if you get a few mates together and you do a Secret Santa, it's a great way of just buying one gift, not obviously spend on everybody, but you have a really fun night out and you get to get all your friends together, and that's always a lot of fun. So if all else fails, Secret Santa, get your 12 guys together and do it that way.
Secret Santa is always a great idea. Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that one. I mean, I've seen lots of offices as well getting involved on the Secret Santa game, and that becomes even more hilarious because there's that added dynamic of let's be appropriate with our work colleagues. And some of the gifts that I saw come about, certainly at one of my previous workplaces, were that was absolutely hilarious. I would definitely encourage getting involved in that as well. I mean, I think that brings us to the end of episode 2. How was that?
That was great. I had a lot of fun. I hope that the listeners enjoyed it. I think we covered a lot of topics today. And so really chuffed that went.
Amazing. I mean, I think what we can say that we didn't know this time last week, let's say, is the platforms that we're publishing it on. So we've decided to go through Anchor as our sort of main publishing platform. So basically, Anchor gives us a bit of extra functionality. If you would like to ask us a question, I would definitely encourage you to send through a voice note, which you can do through that Anchor app. Basically on the back of that, Anchor publishes to all major platforms. Obviously, we've kind of just started this podcast, so a lot of them are still busy being registered. But the sort of most two common ones that we're really looking for is Spotify, which is up and live, and then Apple Podcasts, which should still take a few days, but hopefully will come up there. And then, of course, for the video feed, YouTube as well. So if you'd like to see this podcast in its video glory, definitely check us out there. And I mean, even if you want to just see the bloopers, I don't think there were too many this time, but certainly last week there were a couple that we've added along there.
Yeah, I think if you want to see Chad trying to give back his Christmas presents, then wait for the bloopers.
Amazing. So yeah, I mean, that's episode 2. We're definitely looking forward to the next one again, and please subscribe. Of course, as Barry said, we have been sharing this on our social medias, but given the drought that's coming along in December, you won't be seeing much of that from Barry. So hit subscribe to make sure you actually don't miss an episode, and we'll definitely be grateful for that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chad, and thanks for listening, guys. Look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Awesome. Thanks, Barry. Again, that was Barry Maurice, tuned in via Skype from Johannesburg. I'm Chad Sturley, and thanks for listening to Across the Pond.
Pond, across the pond with Barry and Chad.
The week that was.
I love it. As looks like.
He kind of, what's the right word? Let me actually quickly get this right word, and I'll quickly.
The week that was.
Barry, you're up again.
Alrighty, so so it's hashtag 100 days of code.
Sorry, no, I mean your personal Twitter handle.
Oh, my personal.
But I certainly think if you are bought a gift by your friend, I think it's only common courtesy to return it, and certainly I think if you are doing a sort of Christmas,
not to return the gift, but to return the favor, right?
I just realized I didn't make that clear enough. Thanks for correcting there.
Just wanted to clarify. Yeah.
Definitely do not give the gift back. I think that will be a wrong move. Certainly buy another gift of equal value. That was kind of my return, the sort of way that I meant return. Cool. Another episode.